Motorola's involvement in mobile communications began with a significant milestone in 1973. Martin Cooper made the world's first public cell phone call on a Manhattan sidewalk using the DynaTAC prototype. This call took place while a Bell Labs rival was on the other end. The achievement positioned Motorola as a leader in developing cellular technology. In 2007, Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone on stage. In a Motorola boardroom, executives regarded it as a toy. 3 years later, that same boardroom reflected a different reality with reduced occupancy and indicators of financial difficulty. The company's market share had declined from 21% to single digits. The phones that had once been central to the industry were now less sought after and in some cases considered outdated. This change led to substantial losses of $4.3 billion. In 2 years, the situation presents a notable contrast. The company responsible for advancing mobile phones to broad use became one whose offerings were no longer in demand by the market. This outcome is examined not as a matter of past achievements alone, but as a study in the elements of power, timing, and instances where confidence derived from previous accomplishments advanced ahead of strategic vision. The analysis of this decline commences with a review of these dynamics in the context of the mobile phone sector. The origins of Motorola trace back to Chicago. In September 1928, amid the early stages of the Great Depression, Paul Galvin and his brother Joseph established operations in a rented factory, focusing on the production of battery eliminators for radios. These devices allowed users to plug radios into electrical outlets rather than relying on costly batteries. Paul Galvin, possessing both sales and engineering capabilities, identified a larger opportunity. He observed developments in integrating radios into automobiles and committed resources to what he termed sound in motion. He selected the name Motorola, combining motor for the vehicle with Ola from Victrola to represent sound. In 1930, Galvin demonstrated a Motorola-equipped vehicle at the Atlantic City Radio Show by parking at the pier and playing music at high volume. This approach generated considerable interest and incoming orders. The company navigated the economic difficulties of the Depression period by transforming a necessity into a desirable product offering, which provided the foundation for sustained operations. During World War II, the company advanced further. By developing the first practical two-way radios, this included the handy-talkie and subsequently the walkie-talkie, which were utilized by soldiers in the field. These developments not only supported the war effort, but also built technical expertise that proved valuable afterward. Following the war, Motorola achieved leading positions in car radios, then expanded into televisions and semiconductors. By the late 1960s, the organization had become a major entity in American engineering, characterized by decentralized and independent divisions, each focused on achieving primacy in their areas. This structure fostered internal drive for innovation. Paul's son, Bob Galvin, directed the company towards cellular technology as the subsequent major area of development. The concept emphasized mobility without the constraints of wires. The initiative addressed not only communication needs but also the broader idea of freedom from fixed locations such as desks or vehicles. Initial efforts encountered substantial obstacles, including regulatory discussions with the FCC and significant investments in research and development. Along with large-scale prototypes, the prevailing culture emphasized rapid learning from setbacks and accelerated iteration with the goal of establishing leadership in emerging areas. These approaches positioned the company for the breakthrough that occurred by 1973. On April 3, 1973, Martin Cooper utilized the DynaTAC prototype to place a call on 6th Avenue to Joel Engel at Bell Labs. The prototype weighed 2 pounds but demonstrated functionality, marking an important step in proving the viability of portable cellular communication. 10 years and approximately $100 million in investment later, the DynaTAC 800X became available in 1984 at a price of $3,995, offering 30 minutes of talk time. It served as a status symbol, particularly among Wall Street professionals, and established Motorola's position in the early commercial phase of mobile phones. Motorola maintained dominance during the analog period of mobile phones through continued development. The company developed infrastructure, including cell towers, and licensed its technology on a global basis, which helped expand its reach and revenue streams. Subsequent models, such as the Micro TAC and the StarTAC, were introduced, building on the initial foundation. The StarTAC had a notable impact on the market due to its compact design that allowed it to be clipped to a belt and its positioning as a premium product. Market share increased substantially as a direct result of these product successes. At one point, Motorola held over 50% of the market in the United States. On the global stage, the company competed directly with Nokia for leadership position. The 1990s represented a period of strong performance, with a range of products including pagers, two-way radios, semiconductors, and handsets that supported each other through interconnected operations, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. The implementation of Six Sigma contributed to establishing quality benchmarks across the industry, enhancing reliability and reputation. Production facilities operated continuously to meet demand. The company's stock value rose significantly in response to the operational and market successes. The introduction of the RAZR occurred in 2004 under the leadership of CEO Ed Zander. This model featured a thin profile constructed with anodized aluminum and included a backlit keyboard, along with a 0.3 megapixel camera. Despite the basic camera specification, it achieved sales of 130 million units due to its design appeal. Prominent individuals were frequently seen with the device, further enhancing its status. Revenue levels increased markedly as a consequence. By 2006, Motorola maintained 21% of the global market share. The company was engaged not only in the sale of phones, but also in promoting a sense of aspiration associated with the brand. The brand regained a favorable perception in consumer markets. Financial markets responded positively to the performance. Industry observers described the RAZR as comparable to the iPod within the phone category. Within the organization, the sense of achievement created an impression of continued success and market leadership. Although divisions continued to have internal competition, the financial results minimized concerns regarding these issues. The overall position appeared stable and dominant until initial indications of change emerged in the underlying technology that had supported prior success. The years from 2004 to 2006 represented the period of highest performance for Motorola in the consumer mobile market. The RAZR achieved widespread use across various segments of society. Figures such as Paris Hilton, David Beckham, and Bono were among those who carried the device. The product was not distinguished by superior technical specifications compared to alternatives, but stood out as the most preferred option in the market. Motorola's stock value reached peak levels during this time. Revenue generated by the handset division increased by a factor of 2. The company exercised control over the key aspects of design, production, and how the product was perceived by the public. The influence on culture was comprehensive, with flip phones becoming integrated into fashion trends. In both professional environments and social venues, possession of the RAZR served as an indicator of status. Analysts within the industry assessed Motorola as holding an unchallenged position in terms of consumer appeal. The company established the prevailing trends, emphasizing thin profiles and the clamshell format as the standard. Projections from market analysts anticipated ongoing growth in the double-digit range. The brand became directly associated with the concept of mobility in general. Competitors did not achieve a similar degree of attractiveness in the eyes of consumers. Nokia, despite its position as the overall global leader, encountered competitive pressure specifically in the United States market. The perspective held internally, and Motorola emphasized that the company had originated the mobile phone category and would therefore continue to guide its direction. The achievement at this peak was interpreted as an expected outcome based on prior capabilities. Internal evaluations did not identify emerging indicators of change in the external environment at that stage. Even as sales of the RAZR remained strong, certain developments occurred that were not immediately apparent as threats to the company's position. One such development was the Iridium satellite initiative around 2002. Motorola committed substantial funding to create a global satellite network. However, the system was introduced after the optimal time, and the associated phones carried a price of $3,000, leading to the project's bankruptcy. The resulting financial write-off impacted available capital and the company's reputation in the market. Another development involved internal activities. In 2005 and 2006, engineers presented concepts for early touchscreen interfaces and platforms based on Linux. Leadership at the company rejected these proposals based on the belief that consumers prioritize physical hardware design over the addition of software elements. During this same period, Apple was engaged in the internal development of the iPhone. Google was actively seeking collaboration partners for its Android operating system. Samsung directed resources toward advanced display technologies and processing components. The competitive challenge was not in the form of an improved version of the existing flip phone design, but constituted a new product category altogether. Research conducted within Motorola continued to reflect continued preference for flip phones among users. The company's internal evaluation systems emphasized continued development of RAZR-style products rather than exploration of high-risk touchscreen options. The organizational approach, which had previously involved bold commitments to cellular technology, now prioritized preservation of the established product line. Early indicators, including reductions in average selling prices and a slowdown in the rate of new product introductions, were not given priority attention because of the immediate financial benefits provided by RAZR sales. The source of pressure was not a conventional competitor, but a fundamental shift in how the market category was being defined. The culture of competing internal divisions that had previously supported innovation began to generate inefficiencies. In operations, leaders of the various divisions engaged in resource allocation disputes resembling those of separate organizations. Chris Galvin, who was a grandson of the founder, left his role in 2003 following internal conflicts at the board level. Ed Zander, who joined from Sun Microsystems as an external executive, assumed responsibility for an organization with fragmented structures. He facilitated the launch of the RAZR, which achieved its objectives, but was unable to address the divisions. Between groups, executive meetings frequently involved heated exchanges. Decisions regarding promotions favored individuals aligned with existing power structures rather than those with innovative perspectives. The culture, which had been relatively flat and oriented toward engineering solutions, developed additional layers of bureaucracy. The Six Sigma process, originally a competitive advantage, evolved into a requirement for extensive approvals that slowed decision-making. A pattern of limited awareness emerged in which previous successes fostered an attitude of superiority. Internal views often expressed the position that because the company had created the mobile phone, newer entrants from Silicon Valley offered limited, relevant guidance. Skilled employees departed for opportunities at companies such as Apple and Google. Planning activities related to strategy increasingly focused on resolving internal territorial issues. Although financial reports indicated ongoing profitability, the underlying organizational health was affected as resource decisions were made primarily to maintain established areas of control, instead of pursuing broader market opportunities. One of the primary strategic errors was treating the RAZR's success as an inevitable destiny rather than a singular achievement. Instead of investing in the development of a true next-generation successor, the company opted for incremental improvements to the RAZR line. These included variants that were thinner, available in new colors, and featuring minor camera upgrades. Although these models continued to sell, the distinctive appeal of the original began to fade. Manufacturing costs stayed elevated, which in turn compressed profit margins and reduced overall financial efficiency. A second critical mistake lay in the outright denial of the touchscreen revolution. Internal engineers had developed early prototypes of touchscreen concepts and Linux-based platforms during 2005 and 2006. However, leadership dismissed these initiatives, operating under the assumption that consumers valued hardware, beauty, and physical buttons more than software complexity. This perspective led to the rejection of promising internal developments. When Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, CEO Ed Zander responded publicly in a dismissive manner. Internally, any emerging sense of panic was actively suppressed, preventing necessary adjustments in strategy. Third, Motorola persisted with proprietary software approaches at a time when the broader industry was transitioning to open platforms. The company conducted experiments with Linux and Windows mobile operating systems. yet the resulting products were often half-baked and failed to meet market expectations. A notable example was the 2006 ROZR, positioned as a partner device. For iTunes, its clunky design drew criticism and ridicule, transforming what was intended as a strategic collaboration with Apple into a significant humiliation. Fourth, resource allocation decisions were driven by ego and legacy considerations. Substantial financial resources that might have supported operating system development or potential acquisitions were instead directed toward defending patents from the analog era and sustaining legacy infrastructure. This allocation reflected a focus on protecting past achievements rather than building capabilities for future competition. Fifth, the company engaged in late and desperate pivots toward new technologies. By 2008, efforts intensified to develop Android-based devices, culminating in the Droid launch in 2009. However, these actions came after the market had already aligned strongly with offerings from Apple and Samsung. The timing of these moves proved particularly damaging to competitive positioning. Underlying these errors was a classic psychological trap known as success bias. Internal discussions frequently referenced the RAZR's achievements with the mantra that the company could replicate such success at will. This mindset contributed to compounded missed opportunities, including the failure to secure early partnerships or acquisitions related to Android, the underestimation of the emerging app ecosystem, and insufficient attention to network effects that were strengthening competitors. Strategic choices originating from senior leadership exacerbated the situation. For instance, Xander's approach prioritized short-term profitability over maintaining market share, which accelerated the company's downward trajectory. As a result, by 2009, the handset division was incurring losses amounting to $1.20 billion in a single quarter. The firm that had once been defined by its speed and execution now demonstrated the slowest responses precisely when rapid adaptation was most critical in the evolving market. Between 2007 and 2011, Motorola experienced a rapid and severe decline. In its mobile phone business, the quantitative indicators were stark. Global market share fell from 21% in 2006 to just 6% by 2009. Losses in the handset division reached $4.3 billion over 2 years. Production facilities began to operate below capacity, and workforce reductions affected thousands of employees. The brand, previously regarded as iconic within the consumer electronics space, quickly became associated with underperformance. In 2010, the company underwent a structural division into 2 separate entities: Motorola Solutions, focused on enterprise and public safety communications, and Motorola Mobility, which continued to handle consumer mobile phones. Although presented as a strategic reorganization, this separation effectively functioned as an amputation of the struggling consumer division. Motorola Mobility continued to experience significant cash outflows. Subsequently, in 2012, Google acquired the mobility business for $12.5 billion, with the transaction valued primarily for its patent portfolio. This event symbolized the transfer of the once innovative mobile technology assets to a new owner. 2 years later, Google divested the business to Lenovo for $2.91 billion, representing a substantial reduction in value and a clear fire sale. The collapse affected every aspect of the consumer business. Customer loyalty eroded as users shifted to other brands. Retail presence diminished as shelves previously dedicated to Motorola products stood empty. One of the final indicators of the transition was the closure of the last American manufacturing facilities. Engineers and other staff departed with severance packages, while the intellectual property they had developed supported the growth of competing organizations. What had required decades of development and investment was largely dismantled within a span of approximately 4 years. The absolute power the company had held in the mobile sector dissipated completely during this period. This outcome illustrates the speed with which market positions can erode when foundational strategic elements are not maintained. In the period following the major restructuring, Motorola Solutions has maintained operations successfully in the areas of public safety, radios, and enterprise technology. This segment generates steady profits, though it receives limited attention from general consumers. Meanwhile, the consumer phone business, under the Motorola Mobility name, continues through its acquisition by Lenovo. These devices are positioned primarily in budget and mid-range market segments. Occasional product releases, such as revivals of the RAZR in foldable formats, reference the company's historical designs but have not restored its previous market dominance. The patents retained by Google following the acquisition contributed to the development and strengthening of the Android ecosystem. The original entity that built the foundation of mobile communications now exists more as a historical reference than an active market force. While the Motorola name persists in certain product categories, the core innovative spirit and influence that characterized its early contributions to cellular technology have been dispersed across the technology industry. Its legacy is primarily documented in historical accounts and preserved artifacts rather than in current competitive standings. The decline of Motorola illustrates more than technological shifts. It reveals underlying psychological and organizational dynamics common in established companies. Success often generates the very conditions that undermine long-term viability, including overconfidence presented as assured leadership and the misinterpretation of internal rivalries as drivers of progress. Timing, once an advantage, can be confused with permanent superiority. The core principle is clear. When an organization begins to view its most recent major innovation as evidence of perpetual innovative capacity, the process of decline has already commenced. Market positions are inherently temporary, and competitive environments respond swiftly to signs of strategic denial. Leaders who equate current market share with future insight, or who prioritize hardware features over comprehensive user experience, or who rely on historical accomplishments as guarantees of continued relevance, effectively limit their organization's prospects. The fundamental strategic lesson centers on the necessity of humility. Companies must analyze and prepare for emerging competitive landscapes, even while dominating existing ones. Motorola demonstrated the technical means for wireless communication, yet subsequently failed to heed indicators of market evolution. In both business strategy and broader decision-making, declines rarely occur abruptly. They result instead from a gradual and deliberate failure to recognize environmental changes. The devices that once defined an era now serve as reminders of a key vulnerability in strategic management: the assumption of invincibility. What specific measures could leadership teams implement today to avoid similar patterns of success-induced blindness in their industries?